Good evening. This is your host of the Scroll Fire Podcast. This is Eleazar. I am so happy to have you with me tonight, and I thank you for joining me. Tonight, we're excited about where we're headed as prophets and seers, and that we're growing in the knowledge, understanding, and empowerment of our Lord and Savior, Yeshua HaMashiach. I'm excited tonight because we're entering into podcast number 7. Number 7. Can you believe that we've done 7 podcasts? Now, before tonight, I've never done a podcast, and so in the future, we're going to go live. But tonight, we're going to continue with the podcast number 7. Now, you can find us on uh, Spotify under Scroll Fire, and you can find us on YouTube at um, Scroll Fire Publishing House at yahoo.com. I think at gmail.com. So I'm excited tonight. Please excuse my voice. So, just a little rundown of what we've talked about in our first few sessions. Podcast number 1 was just a general introduction to Scroll Fire Podcast and Scroll Fire Publishing. Podcast number 2 was on seatedness. Podcast number 3 was on scroll. Podcast number 4 was on remembrance. Uh, podcast number 5, yeah. Podcast number 5 was was on mantle. Podcast number 6 was on throne, and this podcast number 7 is going to be on jurisdiction. I want to talk to you tonight about jurisdiction. Jurisdiction. Uh, jurisdiction, the borders of your scroll. What you govern and what you don't. So tonight I'm going to take my time and go through this podcast. Jurisdiction is scroll-based, not ambition-based. You don't govern what you want. You will govern what you were sent to steward. You don't get to pick to govern what you want. You govern what you were sent to steward. So if you're sent to govern in the courtroom of heavens, in the courtrooms of the heavens, I said, that's where you are, but you don't have no business trying to govern a bloodline. If you are sent to govern in a certain dimension in the spirit realm, you're not sent to govern a territory. So you need to be careful that you don't try to pick and choose what you want to govern. In natural terms, jurisdiction refers to legal authority within a divine boundary. In scroll terms, jurisdiction is the border of your scroll reach. Your voice carries weight in the realms where your name was written to govern. You may be called to, like I said before, you may be called to speak or be present in the midst of families, but not the nations. You may be called to govern within cities, but not galaxies. You may be called to govern people, but not timelines. You may be called to govern bloodlines, but not a global stage. There's no dishonor in small jurisdictions. The dishonor comes when you decide for yourself that you're going to overreach and try to govern within a capacity that wasn't written in your scroll. A mantle without jurisdiction is dangerous. A throne without jurisdiction is exposed. A voice outside of jurisdiction is noise, no matter how accurate. In Matthew 10, Jesus sent the disciple and it says, "Do not go into the way of the Gentiles, but go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Why? Because at that point, their jurisdiction was limited. Later it would expand, but at the moment, they had to be obedient to that particular boundary, which was also a test of alignment. So they were supposed to go to the household of Israel, not to the rest of the world. They would later on, but this particular time they had to go to the household of Israel. And all of them didn't go, they all went to specific different places. The pattern, you're not judged by how far you go, you're judged by how faithful you are within the borders that have been designed for you. Everybody has jurisdictions. And so if I were to talk about my jurisdiction is me, you within yourself. We're not. You govern yourself, then you can govern your family, then you govern your household, and then if the Lord lets you, you govern what's around you. Then again, He might have someone else to govern what's around you, but you govern the things before you. Every platform isn't for you. Every invitation isn't for you. Every burden is a burden you carry. You got to be careful about the jurisdictions that you're called to and what you're supposed to do within those jurisdictions. Generally, like I said before, thresholds are the type of those thresholds you have to experience define your jurisdiction. One of my thresholds, I know that one of my jurisdictions is governmental, specifically dealing with the United States, specifically dealing with various locales within the United States. I know that part of my jurisdiction is in the heavens, is cosmic in nature. But these are things that I know, but at the same time, the revealing of the threshold brings you into the maturity of knowing the capacity of your jurisdiction. You look at Uzzah, he touched the ark trying to help, but it wasn't his jurisdiction. He wasn't evil, he was misaligned, and heaven does not excuse overreach when it's emotional. So when you decide to operate outside of your jurisdiction in another person's jurisdiction, you're not aligned with heaven and you put yourself in a precarious situation. And it happens all the time, and I hate to say this, in churches, in the church culture, prophets speak in the marriages, and it's not their assignment. Apostles claim territories they weren't sent to. Matter of fact, you get an apostle who's assigned to the ecclesia trying to govern a territory he wasn't even assigned to. People lay hands with oil and they don't have any jurisdiction over those people. And the crazy thing is, majority of the time when these things are happening, the prophet's not even seated. The apostle's not seated. The preacher's not seated. So you're operating in mimicry anyway, and we're gonna get into that. So I'll say this directly: if you prophesy without jurisdiction, the word might be accurate, but the enforcement might be blocked. Now I came out of a prophetic ministry, and there was tons of prophecy. But the thing I noticed, and I noticed this recently, was that we were not seated. So even though the prophecy was correct, the enforcement wasn't there. And what happened with the person that received the prophecy, they end up in these cycles, these what I call prophetic loops. You have no resolution to the issue that you're prophesying about, or you have, and what happens is that prophetic loop continues to go because there's no enforcement to make it go where it's supposed to go. You're speaking a word, even though the word's true, you're speaking it from a soulish place and that soulless place does not produce enforcement. The only thing that produces enforcement is when you speak from a heavenly seat and a heavenly place, and you speak from your throne, which is within the jurisdiction that God has given you. So we're all familiar with the 7 sons of Sceva. They try to cast out a demon using Jesus' name. That's not their jurisdiction to be casting out anything. The demon replies, Jesus I know, Paul I know, but who are you? In other words, you ain't got no jurisdiction here. They were imitating scroll authority, and they didn't even know what their scroll was. They got beat, stripped, and exposed. So if you want to get beat, stripped, and exposed, operate outside your jurisdiction. That's why a lot of prophets get in trouble. They have ecclesiastical renderings, or they may have a national rendering, and they're prophesying from a cosmic perspective, and they ain't got no business doing it. They don't realize that familiar spirits can show you or give you a vision about something and it be correct, but if you're out of alignment, you're going to cause these prophetic loops to begin to manifest. And people never find their way. So jurisdiction, in other words, especially when you're dealing from a heavenly place, gives you protection from those intimates, from your enemies. Because if you're in a heavenly place and you're declaring, or you're embodying from a heavenly place, those spirits can't even bother you because they can't access where you are. So governing from the seat where peace answers you. Let's let's look at the gift of jurisdiction. When you're seated within scroll borders, atmospheres yield to you. You ain't got to strive. You ain't got to gyrate. You got to make a bunch of noise. You ain't got to speak in tongues. You ain't got to go crazy. Atmospheres will yield to your presence because you're seated on your throne within, and you're knowledgeable and functioning within your jurisdiction silently. People shift without pressure. The land responds to your presence. Creation recognizes you not because of what comes out of your mouth, but because of your scroll. When Jesus stepped off the boat, the legion cried out. It wasn't about noise. You didn't see no prayer line. You didn't see no offerings. You didn't see all this stuff going on. Heaven sent him, and the land and the unclean spirit both knew that a seated one has entered the realm. That's what happens every time you enter the realm, when you're seated and you have jurisdiction within that said place. It's going to yield to you. So if you're called and your jurisdiction is a bloodline, any bloodline aberration yields to the embodiment of Christ in you. If the timeline is off, someone got a erroneous prophetic word, it affected the timeline. The timeline's off 10 years. The prophet enters. His jurisdiction is that timeline. That timeline is going to experience acceleration because it has to catch back up to what heaven said about it. Its origin. Your scroll is going to assign you to places where your presence is always an answer before you say a word. Isn't that amazing that your jurisdiction will show up and your jurisdiction will manage and govern situations that you enter into? A lot of times you don't even know that you enter into. God will send you to a certain place in the city. And the minute you step into that place, the spirits or the dimensional beings in that place yield to you. They yield to the embodiment of Christ in you. But at the same time, on the other side, you're going to feel resistance sometimes. You're going to feel rejection, confusion, and entanglement because you're coming up against something. Then sometimes you have to ask when that happens, is this my jurisdiction or I'm operating outside my jurisdiction? When your throne's in place, your borders will keep you. You will know when to say no. You will know where to say no. You will know where to stay hidden. You will know what's your rescue and what's not your rescue. So the jurisdiction is extremely powerful thing that most prophets need to know is that you have jurisdiction, but only you're going to only find your jurisdiction through your scroll. Your scroll, your scroll and your throne will identify your jurisdiction. Your throne, matter of fact, your throne comes with jurisdiction. Jesus' throne came with the jurisdiction of the entire creation. Everything above earth, everything in the earth, and everything under the earth is under his jurisdiction. He went into hell and he had jurisdiction. He came in the earth and had jurisdiction. So God bless you tonight. We love you and thank you.